One that asks, be the one that listens to what people tell us, and be the one that reaches out to help people. And I think, Marian, the work you've done on this trauma is you've helped countless people deal with their own trauma of this event and other events, because you're the one who took the time to do that. So we're very pleased to have you here. There's refreshments in the back of the room. There's cake and drinks. Help yourself at any time for cakes. And then afterwards, after question and answer, Marian will be here to sign some more of the books and so on. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Marian Poeppelmeyer.
This weekend with you one?
Yes.
Okay, would you like to tell them about it? Okay, sorry.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. I meant to do that. See, she's a natural. On Saturday here from 12 to 8 p.m. here in this room and in the outside parking area in the back and in the front. We're having a Be the One open house of Post 32. It's open to the public. We have a car and bike show from noon to 2 p.m. From 1 o'clock to 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, depending on the vendor. This hall will be full of vendors from the county, nonprofits, other organizations that help veterans, and senior citizens. There's a few of us here, so you might want to come here and see what's going on. There'll be food, activities to do. So this Saturday, August 17th, begins at noon. It's an open house. There'll be a couple of bands outside. Stop in and in and out anytime you want by. Thank you. Appreciate that, Marian.
You're welcome. I wish I could be here for it. I love bands. I love festivals, and I love veterans. So, yes, with that ado, I'm Marian. Excuse me, I need to keep doing my classes. Sidebar here, side note, I'm pretty informal. And I inadvertently, within the last 2 years, got ocular transplants in my eye, thinking that I don't have to wear glasses anymore. Well, unbeknownst to me, I can see all you perfectly now, but I cannot read my notes. So I'm constantly going to be doing this, and that is why. And then secondly, 3 weeks ago, right before the trip, I lost my voice. It has been slowly coming back. It usually is not raspy, sounding like Carol Channing. But, I'm kind of working on that Carol Channing imitation. So with that ado, I'll start. And before I begin, because I usually forget, I've been forgetting, I'd like to introduce my sister, Nancy. She's very much a part of the story. She is 15 months old. At the time our dad died on flight 629. And then we have my son-in-law and daughter, Amanda, who never had the privilege of meeting and knowing their grandfather. So they all came with me on the road trip. They are my wonderful roadies and chauffeurs. So I want to get a feel for the audience. And I'm going to give another real quick. I really appreciate the connection with Ralph. I've been wanting to talk to American Legion Post 32 for a very long time because of what they did, what your forefathers, predecessors did, the night and beyond on November 1st, 1955. So I've been very thrilled. I also love the military, support the military, and love every single veteran. So it's been very much of a privilege and an honor to be here. So thank you. So, how many of you were alive? Shoot, that's a bad question. How many of you were there in November 1st, 1955 in the area? Weld County. How many of you? We got a number of you. How many of you remember Flight 629 when it went down? How many of you have heard stories from your parents? Parents? Or friends? Or uncles or aunts who are on the field? How many of you have never heard of Flight 629 and came here tonight to hear more about it? Yeah, we have everyone in this community here, everywhere I've gone, there's been a smattering of everyone. So I hope that you'll all leave with a bit of something new and something you can take home and to be inspired from and to be given hope. That there is beauty that can come out of ashes. And this is what my story, Heart of My Story, is about. In every mass killing or violent crime in the United States, and we have too many of them to count, media attention always swirls around the crime and the criminal. Once the media dies down, national news dies down, local news dies down, it is the families of the victims that are left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. Economically and emotionally, their lives are forever changed, and the ripple effects of trauma are felt for a lifetime. Likewise, the communities in which such atrocities occur are also scarred for decades. You know, there's the Columbine community, Aurora community, and the ripple effect of that trauma goes beyond just the victims' families. It incorporates the whole communities. I'm going to take you a step back in time. You don't have to close your eyes. You don't have to imagine you're there. I don't do guided imagery. But it was the day, November 1st, 1955. And it was a typical day. But it was a day that changed 44 lives, which included 41 families. It changed entire communities. It changed history. It changed aviation. It changed legislation nationally. It changed the media and the courtroom system. It changed airport security. And today, TSA is a byproduct of November 1st, 1955. It also changed my mother, my sister, and my life. But it also changed Weld County. And Longmont, I know, is part of Weld County and Boulder County. So Longmont is included in this whole area, vicinity. In a quiet rural farming community in Colorado, life would never be the same again. What we're talking about, it covers the area of Route Highway 66 to the north, going east and west, Highway 11 or Route 11, Country Road 11, going south, north and south, then over across Ronald Reagan Parkway, which is also Highway or County Road 28, then up to the north side on Route 13, which is now Colorado Boulevard. And that is the epicenter of what occurred on November 1st, 1955. 1 square mile, 640 acres, 4 farmers. A hop farm, the Heil farm, the Lang farm, and the Lee farm. And each farm comprised of 160 acres. It was huge. So on November 1st, 1955, all the farmers spent the whole day harvesting the beet fields. They planted beets in the field that year. And they harvested morning to night. By early evening, after the big harvesting was done, they put away all their harvesting equipment and had just taken it off the fields. The farmers went home, of course, to enjoy a quiet evening to get rest before the work started again the next day. Businesses like Johnson's Corner. How many of you are familiar with Johnson's Corner truck stop up the way on 25? Well, it too was busy taking care of their customers, pumping the gas, and serving in the restaurants. It was just a normal day. Children in the area were at school. They were playing. They were doing their homework. They're coming home doing their chores. And the wives and mothers, they were either working, whatever they did, help their farmers, farm the land, whatever they did, the mothers were actively just in a normal day and carrying it out. All was normal. Likewise, across the United States on the East Coast, in Philadelphia, Hatfield, Pennsylvania to be exact. My mother, named Marty Hobgood, she was 5 feet tall, that's where I get her height from, and she was 6 months pregnant with me, and waddling, she said, and she had a 15-month-old daughter named Nancy. She's sitting back there, my older sister. That day on November 1st, she took her husband, Marian Pierce Hobgood, our father, to the airport in Philadelphia. He was en route to Oregon, and his plane would take him to New York, to Chicago, to Denver, and to Portland, Oregon. He worked with the Philco company at the time. He was an electrical engineer, and he worked in radar technology. And Philco could have sent another gentleman instead. It was between my dad and another gentleman to be sent on this long-term project. And when Philco sent electrical engineers on projects, that wasn't for a day or two and they'd fly him back home. No, he would be gone for 3 to 6 weeks. So Philco, knowing my mother was expecting with a child, opted anyway to send my dad. So that's how my dad ended up on flight 629. He loved my mom very much. They got married August 1951, and they were so excited. They're so madly in love. They went skiing, mountain climbing. They had a great Sunday school, young adult Sunday school class out of their church. They threw parties, they danced, they played games, and they were enjoying life. They had saved up money for the first home that they bought and moved in August of 1955. And they were so excited, they're expecting their second child. My father was also en route to getting his master's degree in electrical engineering because he really wanted to support his family. So he wanted to further his education. So Mom that day took him to the airport and stood at the airport in Philadelphia on the platform. Then they had observation platforms, and the airplanes were tarmacs. So she stood and waved at Hobby, as he called her first love, Hobby, waved at him, our dad, not knowing that it was going to be her last goodbye. And she was so exhausted afterwards. Oh, Nancy wasn't there. Nancy had a sitter, which is an important part of the story. So she goes home, picks up Nancy, goes home. She's very exhausted. By the end of the day, she decides to go to bed early that night. So that was November 1st, 1955. My mom told her story for the first time when I was 42 years old. And she said that she had a gnawing feeling in her stomach about our dad going on that flight. She had a premonition, if you want to call it, a foreboding spirit. But on both sides, life was all normal. But would it remain normal? Hobby, as I said, flight 629, mainliner Denver, left from New York to Chicago to Denver. It was 20 minutes late due to a lot of different things. And it was 20 minutes late. And finally took off at 6:52 p.m. from the old Stapleton Airport. There were 39 passengers on board, 5 crewmen. There's a little side story. The pilot, Captain Hall, who is in that Life magazine back there, he wasn't supposed to be on that flight either. But his friend, other pilot friend, asked him, I have to do this for my family. can you take this flight? And so he did. There was another gentleman, little history. Ken Carr was also working for Philco. He should have been on that flight with my dad. But he was late due to work. So he caught a later plane, and he was not on that flight. He would have been a traveling partner with my dad. And he ended up just recently dying at the ripe old age of 93. And he ended up having more patents than you can ever imagine. He was 89 years old, creating patents on kidney dialysis, on revolutionizing. So his life was spared if he wasn't on that flight. But the plane took off, and within 11 minutes from Stapleton Airport going northwest, 7:03 p.m., all would change dramatically as the plane was destroyed mid-air after takeoff. The air traffic controllers in Stapleton Airport saw 2 blits on the radar, and they knew, something went down. Something happened. Now back then, the airplanes, they were still experimenting with radar technology, perfecting it. And with the Rocky Mountains, just a month before, there was a crash at Medicine Bow. A United Airlines flight crashed. That was malfunction of the plane. So when he saw these 2 blitzes, he thought, oh no, which plane just took off from Stapleton? Which plane was it? So process of elimination, it was flight 629, a passenger plane. So the air traffic controllers, of course, sounded the alarm. And even though they were miles away, everyone around Weld County felt the blast, heard the blast, saw the blast, their houses shook, and they knew something had gone down. It was pitch black. It was rural, so there's no electricity up there, no phone lines were up there, and the blasts were reported to have been like a rocket blast, but lighting up the whole entire sky. Was that mammoth. The farmers were the first ones on the field. So the Hop family hopped in the truck, brother, father, and Conrad Hop is alive today. And he couldn't be here tonight, otherwise he would be here. But they were the first on the beat field. And what they encountered was a war zone. Plane debris was everywhere. There are fires everywhere. The engines of the plane made 6 to 16 foot deep craters. 2 of them. And they encountered and discovered it was not a cargo plane, but a plane of passengers. And they saw a lot of horrible human carnage. So he ran back to his house when they recognized, when they came across the first body, ran home, got blankets, grabbed his girlfriend Martha, who's now his wife of 67 years, and took her back on the field. And they began the search for bodies. And when they found a body, they would cover the body, and he would take his truck around and dig circles around to mark the bodies. And then they learned that looters were on the field. The looters were mutilating the bodies, cutting them up for their jewelry, like the rings, the finger, and stealing from the wreckage. Now, they weren't the only ones on the field. All the farmers would have been on the field. However, 40 of the bodies were on the Hop farm. And to this day, he knows where one definitely was in this backyard. He's pointed out to me. The others were all over, and he knows where there's a baby, a 15-month-old, 13-month-old baby, was flown into another farm because he was so lightweight. And the pilots, the nose dove, the tail was in one part of the field, the nose in the other, 1.5 miles away, and fires were brewing everywhere. So they could not even rescue the bodies of the pilots until the fires died several days later. So the pilots, unfortunately, were incinerated. This is the carnage that Weld County experienced. So within 2 hours, all of this is going on. People are gawking. People are coming up from Denver up 25, up that rural road, and they're gawking and looking, and looters were coming in. Media was swirling around with helicopters. The FBI got brought up. The Denver police got brought up to help guard the place. The manager at Johnson's Corner, what he did was at one time an authority gave him a gun and said, you stand and watch and make sure not a single car comes on this property. And if they don't go away and they stay there and they keep moving, you have the power to shoot them on the spot. That is a story told by Phil Barely, who is still alive. He was 5 years old at the time and remembers everything clearly. Johnson's Corner, the manager, that was at one point of the night, but immediately he went back to Johnson's Corner, the only truck stop in the area. He called all the suppliers. You know, back then, he knew the bread supplier, the coffee supplier, the hot dog supplier by name. So he called and said, something serious has gone down here. I need all the food that you can bring me. And he brought his staff in, and it worked around all through the night, making sandwiches, lunches, snacks, for that, by that time, hundreds of citizens, ordinary citizens and people in Will County were on the field searching for bodies, because back then they didn't know they all landed on the hot farm. So they're searching for bodies, and the debris. This massive search went on that night. It wasn't just a 2-hour stint, it lasted for days. One book records it was over by 4 a.m. in the morning. Local reports here, it carried on for days, for a couple days, at least for the bodies. That was what was happening. Now our mother, going back to my mother in Philadelphia, she had gone to bed early. So she knew nothing about this calamity. She was tired. By 11 o'clock at night Eastern time, which was 9 o'clock this time, 2 hours had passed here. And within those 2 hours, all this activity was going on. The people here locally responded to this severe crisis. My mother heard 3 pebbles, well, not 3, but pebbles were being thrown at her bedroom window. So she woke up and she looked out the window. And at the bottom of her window, she saw her OBGYN, her pastor, and my dad's best friend. All 3 of these men came to deliver the news to my mother. They all knew each other, apparently, and they agreed to meet. So my mom rushes down, doesn't know, she thinks something's wrong, but she doesn't know yet. Runs to the front door. At the same time, the phone rings, and it's her sister in Tennessee, who saw the news, knew that our dad was on that flight, and told Martha the news. My mom immediately let the men in. I think she already let them in. The phone rings, she hears the news, and she races upstairs, grabs Nancy, who was sleeping in the crib, hugs her, and screams. Gut-level screams, over and over and over again. That was how my mother's life was changed. My dad was only in their house for 3 months. And of course, that first night they did not know it was sabotage. They didn't know what caused the plane to blow up the way it did. So I painted a little bit of the story for you. There's more to the story, more details. Like there were no phone lines. The phone company came in and ran phone lines for communication. The farmers, they were using their trucks for lights because it was pitch dark. In cold weather, they were turning on their car lights or vehicle lights just to see. And they actually did a lot of the search in pitch darkness. Gradually, some farmers were able to run back, took the time and got generators that offered larger light. The FBI was on the scene, the CAB was on the scene. Long Times Call reporter actually got on the field, and most of the pictures you see were taken by Long Times Call reporter. I learned that in 2022 when I came. So my mom's life was shattered instantly. One of the gentlemen would have spent the night with her to make sure she was okay. The very next day, her friends kicked into action, and her friends pursued to make her maternity outfit, because there are no maternity clothes for pregnant women back then. And they took care of Nancy. Nancy was put in the hands. They had wonderful friends. And by November 7th, my dad was buried. November 7th, 1955, within 6 days. I love coming here. I just learned at another presentation, 2 gals have been researching this tediously, and they're going to send it to me. They said, your dad was one of the first 5 to be found on the field that night, and the first to be identified by the FBI and sent to the State Armory in Greeley, became a makeshift morgue. I also met today the funeral director's son. He was at a presentation. It was his father that was one of the funeral directors on the field, that once the FBI had identified the body, he would then take them back to the State Armory in Greeley. It was the only place where 44 bodies could be placed. The funeral director in Greeley also stepped into action and called all funeral directors in the area. So there were multiple people from coming all around, coming to assist in this disaster. My mother, while all this activity is going on, it didn't stop in 2 days or 3 days for the Weld County residents. The cleanup of the debris flew for over 6 square miles. It was carrying mail that I don't even know the names of the towns here, but flew like 20 miles away. Mail was being found. Broken china dishes were all around the roads. Debris, the plane debris was humongous. And the FBI, as they found the plane debris, the tail was in one place, the nose in the other, and the fuselage ripped apart, as I said earlier. But part of it was they took the parts and reassembled the parts, carried them back to Denver. United Airlines donated a warehouse where the FBI reconstructed the plane. And by November 7th, it was determined that it was sabotage. They had traced it down to cargo number 4, and where luggage was found. And it is determined there was one piece of luggage totally blown up, and that was the luggage of Daisy King. You'll see her name back there. They didn't yet know who did it. By November 14th, they found the killer. They traced all the steps of who bought dynamite, who bought a timer, who did all the parts stores around Denver, and they arrested the killer, which I will not say his name. They arrested him, and he confessed that he put a bomb on the plane, not just one stick of dynamite, 25 sticks of dynamite worked on that plane. One stick would have brought the plane down and potentially would have killed his mother, but 25 sticks. At the airport in Stapleton, there wasn't baggage checks at the time. So he took his mom to the airport, and her suitcase was extra heavy. It was near Christmas, November 1st. She was going up to Alaska. And he said, "Mom, I've got a Christmas present for you in the suitcase." That was why it was extra weight. So he paid the extra overage cost. But because there was no law requiring baggage checks. No one checked that luggage. And that is what brought down the plane. So while all this activity was going up in Weld County, my mom had to rebuild her life. I heard her story for the first time in 42 years, only because when I was 6 years old, she remarried a stepdad. Bless his little heart. If you're a Southerner, you're not, you're a Westerner, but Southerners say, bless your little heart, and means, it's kind of facetious. He was not a very easy man to live with. He was a rageaholic, controlling, and he did not physically or sexually abuse my sister and I, but he emotionally did, and he was a rageaholic. So she remarried him at 6 years. And part of the reason why was in those 2 months, November 1st to the time that I was born, December 28th, 55, she had to contend with, how am I going to pay the bills? She feared losing the house. What am I going to do with these? How am I going to take care of these kids? She didn't know that I was a girl, at the time. How am I going to do this? She calculated her money would only last 6 years. $50 a month. She calculated it. She also learned that our dad was in the Army, World War II veteran, and he never ever changed his beneficiary over from his mother to her once they got married. So guess who took the insurance money? Our grandmother. And our grandmother refused to give my mom the money. And I found wrenching letters. I was crying and sobbing over it as she wrote, pleading for our grandmother to hand over the money. She wrote, my father's only brother said, what can you do? What can you do? And he couldn't do anything. So our grandmother selfishly kept the money, knowing that her 2 granddaughters were left destitute. So her whole world changed. Well, in time, since the man had the confession, and the court case was about to be held in Denver, because the feds handed it back to the state of Colorado, because the state of Colorado had the death penalty. And they opted to only get the killer with only 1 count of murder, because it would have been too hard to prove that he purposely wanted to kill the 43 other people and that he knew them all by name. It was dragged out of the courts for years. So, on the record, and all the documentation on this, 43 of the passengers, including our dad's name, is wiped out of history, forgotten. And he only got it for 1 count of murder, but he did get the death penalty, and he was not remorseful up to the end. He had ample chances. He was not remorseful. And he could have cared less, by his own quote, about the 43 other passengers. So, we felt justified growing up. I knew the story. And we felt kind of justified. He got the death penalty. He wasn't running away in a prison somewhere. And life went on. And quite frankly, our stepdad was wonderful until we hit teenage years. Then he really became an odor, really didn't know what to do with us. And I remember him yelling at my mother one time, saying, Marty, they're your girls. I also learned as a young adult that he did not pay for our daily needs. He made my mom use my dad's social security number, social security checks, to pay for us. And that is why my mom carried 2 wallets in her purse. I never knew that till I was a young adult, so my mom told me. I always wondered why Mom had 2 wallets. Well, that was why. So he was very selfish. And he loved us the best he could, but he couldn't love us the way our real dad did. And he was not an easy man to live with. But life still went on. I went on to college, and I decided most fatherless daughters will keep everything inside. Statistically, girls tend to harbor things in their heart, whereas fatherless boys will act out. That's why more juvenile delinquents, up until maybe recently, have been boys, because boys will act out. They'll go into drugs, stealing, all kinds of things in the absence of the father in the home. For girls, it's a lot different, and I do have a chapter in my book called The Fatherless. It has a lot of statistics on that. Well, my sister and I were in that category. I chose to dive into my studies and to be the best that I could. That was how I coped. I just dove in. I wanted to be perfect because my stepdad was an ogre, because my dad wasn't around. I had no idea how it affected my thinking and belief system about myself. But regardless, life went on. I married a wonderful man. I've been happily married to him 45 years now. And everything was fine. We were in the ministry, pastoring small churches, but we had crises after crises, death after death. And then my husband, eventually, because his church was too small and it actually closed, he went through that heartbreak. He went back to work, and then he got laid off. And finally, I caved in. And I couldn't cope anymore. Our marriage was a wreck. We had 2 children. Amanda was one of them at the time. I thought we were going to lose our house. Stress was enormous. And so I cried out to God. I'm a woman of faith. I cried out to God. I said, "Look, just give my husband a job, restore our marriage, and help me to cope in life. Why can't I cope?" And God answered me, and he began taking me on a tremendous healing journey, which is recorded in my book. And during the beginning part of this journey and getting healed, I had no idea that all my dysfunctions, like I was always shy and timid, I always felt rejected, I felt like I didn't belong. I had no idea that was all tied in to the lack of my father in the home. Until all this happened and repressed emotions started emerging. But the more I sought God for answers, the more his love descended upon me. Whether you believe it or not, it happened. I don't know how to describe it to you. He just did it. And during that time, my Uncle Hop sent me a package. He doesn't know what I'm going through. My mother doesn't know what I'm going through. And the package has some of the things that are back on the table of my dad's. The Life magazine came in this package. And all kinds of things that were a touch point for my dad. And I felt I at least had something of my dad and my sister, which she wasn't living with me at the time, that we would have. It was so healing just to have that package. That was one of the things that happened, which reassured me that I was on the right track of getting healed for whatever was troubling me. I still didn't put it together that it was the death of my dad from this tragedy. I look back now, what I've been through, that is the ripple effect of trauma. So you have the tragedy, you have the evil act done, you can have the abuse happen to you, you can have divorce happen to you, you have the act, but there's always a ripple effect on it. Changes your thinking, changes your mindset, so you don't even know it. You adopt coping mechanisms you're not even aware of. So as my journey began, God began unraveling me of 40 years of repressed emotions. And the more I sought him for answers, the more his love, as I said, descended upon me. And the more he shed his life and his love in my heart. And he breathed life back in my broken heart. I literally shut down for 6 weeks. And I was a walking zombie. I look back. People, if I went to a counselor, They would have probably sent me to a hospital and put me on drugs, sedated me, what they do now, but I didn't do that. I had faith, and I went to God. I took my faith to Him and said, God, get me out of this situation. I can't go on with life living this way. But the more that God showed me His love for me, the more I wanted to know my biological dad. Thus the name of the book, Finding My Father. The more I began to really want to know who He was for the first time in my life. I wanted to hear His voice. I wanted to feel Him. I wanted to know everything about Him. And I began on my search to know Him. But the more that I began, I'm going to tie it back into Will County like 620, and the more that I wanted to know my father and have my father around and be loved by a father, the more I grew to hate what the killer did. I really started to hate it. I really got angry. Because here he had a stepdad who was very hard to live with, controlling, manipulative, rageaholic. We walked in eggshells all the time. And my mom shuddered in fear with my stepdad. She didn't deserve that. She didn't deserve that at all. So the more I wanted to know my dad, the more I hated what the killer did. And what he did smacked me in the face as I began making all the connecting dots as to why I couldn't cope, why I believed that God was up there with a baseball bat ready to beat me if I got out of line, why I couldn't accept my husband's love for 3 years. I married a man not knowing that he really loved me. Why? Because I didn't believe I was lovable. I used to have public confession here. I had my mind's eye. I was a Christian, knew I had to forgive him, but I didn't want to, and I couldn't. And I would have this mantra going through my head, but you know what you did, you took our dad, and this is I can't say it here, really bad life that we've had, and it could have been worse, to be honest. Other families have other stories. We could have been sexually abused, and we weren't. It could have been that bad. But still, it was very rough. And I had this mantra in my head that I just wanted to let him have it, and then I'd say, but I couldn't. but I couldn't. And over time, I knew that I needed to take that step and forgive him. I'm going to take time to read from my book. How many of you remember Lord of the Rings? And Gollum and the Precious, my precious, and he just didn't want to let go of that ring. Okay? But looking back, I was like Frodo in Lord of the Rings trilogy by Tolkien, who bore the treacherous heaviness of his mission and foreboding force of the One Ring. Had Frodo not made it to Mount Doom and fought Gollum over it, causing both Gollum and the ring to fall into the fire, evil would have embodied Frodo forever. Like the One Ring, the pull of my hatred toward the man who killed my dad, who put the bomb on the plane, killing all 44 passengers, all 44 people, it gained strength more and more each day. I was really angry. And the burden of carrying these intense feelings exacted all that was within me, just like it did Frodo, and weighed me down with an unbearable heaviness. In that moment, that night, I decided this is it. I've got to do it. I had a choice to choose life or death. Hanging on to that hate would imprison me forever, bringing death. Choosing life meant doing the impossible. Frodo had fought that same choice. But my mission was different. What was my mission? To completely forgive the murderer. And the evil ring that held power over me the hate, the anger, and their companions, bitterness and resentment. I knew it was now or never, or I would be forever swallowed by those evil entities. And I did not want to live that way anymore. I did not want it to control me. But I was asked by a write-up by a gentleman who wrote an incredible interview with me about coming. He was a marketing director at Carbon Valley Library. He actually pointed out that quote, which meant he read my book, which is great. He said, Marian, it must have been very hard for you to forgive him. And I said, yes, I didn't want to. He said, well, what steps did you take? And I said, well, I didn't take any steps because I didn't want to. I even asked a pastor. I was taking a counseling course, trying to solve my own problems. And I threw up a question, do you have to forgive a man who died? And the pastor knew my story. He says, yeah, in front of the class, without telling the story. He said, yes, Marian. I thought, oh dear. Oh dear me, I'm caught, red hand. So I didn't do it then, I just couldn't. But that day when I decided I had to, I still couldn't. And so I cried out to God. I said, please help me, give me the grace. So he did. And out of my mouth, instead of coming up ranting and raving, came the man's name. I could never say it before then. Out of my mouth in one instant said, John Graham, I forgive you. You thought you killed my real dad, but you didn't. My real dad is the Heavenly Father. And that came out of my mouth. I was shocked. And then in an instant, as many of us, I believe you have a chaplain here, know the Holy Spirit, in an instant, the Holy Spirit recalled to me the chapter, the verse that says, if you harbor hate in your heart, it's as bad as the sin of murder. That flashed in me. I thought, oh my goodness, my hatred for him is as bad as sin of murder. So I asked God to forgive me for the hatred and bitterness and anger. And guess what? He did. And I was the freest person my entire life. I was so free. And because I did that, I wanted to make my dad's life count. I wanted to make my dad's life count. I didn't want him to have died in vain. All the questions you have, why? Why did he have to be on that plane? Why was anyone have to be on that plane at the time? Why is it that Ken Carr out on the East Coast, who should have flown in with my dad, who missed the plane, not on that plane? All these unanswered questions, we will never know this side of heaven. And I finally had to realize there were no answers. But I did know I wanted to make my dad's life count. Well, it took me 20 years to write my story. And as I wrote it, all the information you heard in the beginning, I had researched. And of course, I learned more from my visits. Became my scene 4. And when I wrote it on Well County and the citizens, I did not want to write about the case. I didn't want to mention the killer's name, although I knew I had to for historical purposes, and for people who were interested in that. But I really didn't. What I saw, though, as I pieced together information from all different places, I saw the American spirit like I'd never, ever, ever seen before. And I saw that everyone here in this area is standing on the legacy of what those people did, what those farmers. There was a baseball team at the University of North Carolina. Heard they dropped the tournament, they quit the tournament, they raced onto the fields to help out in any way they could. You had the American Legion here who just dropped what they did and labored all through the night, carrying coffee and snacks and anything you could. And I'm sure, although I haven't met a veteran with a story yet, but I'm positive, I know veterans, I'm sure there are veterans on that field and that search mission also, while others from this post were on that field, sacrificing their time, energy, love, and compassion. That's what I saw when I wrote my book. And the beginning of my scene 4, I call them scenes instead of chapters, says this: amidst the worst human character exhibited, e.g. the looters, the best in humanity and the American spirit displayed its courage, love, and compassion. So I wrote this book, and through Rick Salinger, CBS 4 put me in contact with Rick Tittle. He's here today. He's been my longtime friend since 2019. Rick Tittle put me in touch with Conrad Hopp, who lives in Firestone. Many of you probably know him. He says he's a member of this American Legion, and he could not be here tonight. But put me in touch with him, and we began talking about the need for a memorial, the need for something to be done. And I kept saying, well, my heart is for a tribute to the citizens in Weld County. That my heart is that something is done to commemorate them. So the pandemic happened, and I didn't want to come having to wear a mask. And I didn't know who to come to except for Rick Tittle put me in touch with Conrad. And I did write CBS 4. They did a wonderful documentary on their 50th or 60th anniversary of Flight 629. That was the one that Conrad Hopp was interviewed in. I hadn't yet met Conrad, but I was so excited because there's a living person testimony from someone who was on the field that night. I was so excited, I wanted to meet him, but I didn't know how I could meet him. I didn't even know if he wanted to meet me, because in that expose, he talked about how horrible and traumatic it was. So I had no idea if he'd be open to meeting me. But under Rick's constant, you gotta come, when all that pandemic veil lifted, 2022, my husband and I came out here. I wanted to thank the communities, but I didn't know how. I thought I would do YouTube. You know, YouTube is very big. And maybe I'll just stand in front of the town halls and put up a YouTube channel and thank all the communities for what they did, almost 70 years ago. And instead I called Johnstown Town Hall, because they were listening to all the history. I called them. I talked to the town clerk. I told her who I was, what I wanted to do. She said, Mary, this is what you do. You write up a presentation and you get on their docket to present at their town hall meetings. So I scheduled 5 town hall meetings, and I ran out of time to speak at any more, but I spoke at Meade, Johnstown, Firestone, Platteville, and Longmont. And in most cases, I was able to show these pictures as I talked to the city council. Most mayors are used to people complaining and yelling, and I come thanking them for what their predecessors had done. So that started my journey here. A year later, I get a call from this gentleman who's holding the GoPro. At that time, he did a radio show, and he was encouraged by a gentleman from Firestone, I believe, who was on the city council there, to you ought to interview Marian Poeppelmeyer. So he found me, connected with me, and he interviewed me. And the rest is history. He introduced me to Phil Beerley, the man who was 5 years old. I introduced them to Rick Tittle and Conrad Hopp. And from then on, we were brainstorming months on a memorial. How could we do this? How could we get one established? How could we commemorate the unsung heroes? Thus, the dream of an unsung heroes across America garden got birthed, including a memorial with the history, honoring the passengers killed, but also commemorating, the key point would be leading up to commemorating all these unsung heroes in your communities. And also use it to project into the nation. That's why we call it Across America. That would become a movement where ordinary, everyday citizens do what they have to do in times of crisis and be encouraged to step up to that, which is the American spirit. America was built on this. Communities helping each other. Towns helping each other in need. And there's so many unsung heroes, like everyone sitting here across America. And I don't think there's a single tribute to them. There is for veterans. Praise God, I'm glad there is. There's plenty for other people, but not just for the average American citizen that really does what is right to do in their communities and help one another. So that really closes my talk. What I did, since I wrote the book, he alluded to in the beginning, Ralph, it is true I became certified in trauma recovery, biblical approach to trauma recovery, and I have a flyer about that on the back there called the Healing Community. It's online. I started that. I created a course. I got trained as a chaplain. Yes, I'm a chaplain, but I did register myself in the state of Ohio. I wanted it for my own purposes. And I also took pastoral counseling courses because what I went through, I don't want anyone else to go through. And I want others to make it through their trauma, their traumatic events, their tragedies, whatever they've gone in life. Some people call it damaged emotions. Some people call it inner healing, whatever you want to call it. I want to help people because I believe that if I can be free, they can be free. And so that is what I'm currently doing. And then I've talked enough about the unsung heroes. That is another takeaway from this, a big dream of mine. But we also are collecting stories. Most of you know, because I've been talking to you all. But I have a sheet here. We are still collecting stories. I'm hearing more and more every time. This is my third time coming. Every time I come, I'm hearing more and more. This story is outlandish. It never happened in the U.S. before. I don't think any scenario like what I just painted for you would ever happen again. Maybe it would. But Denver police, the FBI was involved. Denver people were involved. The Weld County citizens were involved. And for years it was swiped under the rug because it's too traumatic to talk about. So with that due, there are question and answer. There's Ralph coming. I probably went over my time.
You're good.
Okay.
We will entertain questions, let's say for 10 minutes, and then we will break. And Marian, of course, is still here. You could talk to her informally, cake and drinks, and there we go. So questions? I think it's covered.
I know, I gave out a lot of information. It's like, it was all kind of, it's multifaceted.
It is.
Yes.
Thank you.
I don't know, that's riveting to me. And when I talked earlier about be the one, I think you see the connection that Marian has to that, the ability to help people with trauma recovery and all that kind of stuff. I didn't know you have all these certifications and you're a pastor. Whoa, I mean, you don't have to go to that length to help a veteran.
No, you don't.
But you can still help a veteran. So ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for coming here tonight. Please stick around, enjoy questions, comments, and some refreshments. And I want to thank you all again for being here. How about a round of applause for Marian? And
I want to point some of you, many of you have been on the back table. I want you to look. I didn't bring them up here. And I forgot to show you pieces of the airplane here. So if you want to see them, me, Town Hall gave them to me. One for my sister, one for me. Pieces of the airplane. Farmer was tilling them up until the pandemic, and he brings a bucket load of them. He had constantly, for years, decades, been finding them in the field. So we have two books. And then, yes, I'm ready to mingle, but back there are the tags of our dad, with the FBI tags still on them. So you may find that interesting. My mother kept them all these years. And the last positive note is my mom, when she told me her story for the first time in 42 years, she looked at me and she said, Marian, there was never a couple more in love than your father and I. Now, she'd been remarried all those years. She told me that. And then she said, not a day in 42 years, I was 42 years old at the time, 42 years has passed when I have not thought of him. So it's a beautiful love story. And so I'm going to end with that note. That was really touching. Thank you. And come talk to me, talk to my sister. Enjoy the snacks, enjoy the refreshments. And thank you, Ralph.